Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm Michelle, and today I'm going to be sharing a book resource that I came across recently. Now, this book was recommended to me by the Mama Librarian. I'm going to link her channel below. It's an awesome resource. She's great with recommendations. Check out her channel if you haven't before. But she recommended this book to me, How to Homeschool the Kids You Have, Advice from the Kitchen Table. And she was right. I really enjoyed this book. I think this is one of those books that every homeschooler needs to read, that it's not groundbreaking information, but it's so practical and realistic homeschool advice that I think it's really essential. So I'm going to actually flip the camera around and kind of go through the parts of the book that I really thought were helpful, whether you be a new homeschooler or you've been doing this for a while. I wish this book was around when I started homeschooling. Now, it has the copyright of 2022, so it is newer. So it definitely wasn't around. I've been homeschooling. This is our third year. I have a 11-year-old fifth grader, I have a 7-year-old doing first, second grade work, and 4-year-old doing preschool. And so we've been at this for full-time 3 years. I always supplemented my oldest before that. But if I had this resource earlier, in those early years, it would have saved me so much time and effort. I feel like in the beginning of homeschool, a lot of us start out emulating other homeschoolers and what they do until we can really figure out where we're going on our own path. And I spent so much time looking at information and looking at other people and watching YouTube and Instagram, getting all these ideas, but this was just so practical that it would have saved me so much time, and I think I would have found my own way through this book a lot quicker. So I'm going to turn you around and show you what I really like about it. So this is the book, and the authors are Courtney Ostaff, Jen Naughton, and Andrew Campbell. They go by Drew Campbell. And what I love, first of all, about this book is that the authors are not only homeschooling parents who have experience homeschooling for some over 20 years, but they have experience teaching children, they have educational background, they have credentials with dealing with children. They also have neurodiverse children, so they have what I consider the trifecta. They have the experience, they've been doing this a while, they have the educational background, and it's just really practical information here. So I think this is really great. And it was really nice to read a book, because I think there's a lot of homeschooling books written by homeschooling parents out there giving advice, and it's really a lot of the prettier side and the magical side of homeschooling, and not so much the practical side of homeschooling. And I think this definitely talks more about the practicality of homeschooling. So of course you can get it on Amazon, all your normal places. I just borrowed it from the library. Also a great resource, but this is a book I definitely will purchase to keep on my shelf. But again, shows you the authors here. So I did mark some things I want to talk about. So the thing I really like is that it starts with an author introduction, and they talk about kind of their experience and just a little short biography of them, which I think is really helpful. And I really like to know more about the books I'm reading, the author. So goes into the basics, so the different types of homeschoolers you could find yourself to be, and you can of course be more than one of these. I'm definitely more than one. So there's the accidental homeschooler, the pandemic homeschooler, and there's little stories to go with how this person found in their way into homeschooling. The unhappy homeschooler, the medical needs homeschooler, academic homeschooler, special education homeschooler. And it goes so on and so on. So I definitely would fall under the pandemic homeschooler. I started full-time homeschooling in the pandemic, but I'm also very academically minded homeschooler. So I really like that introduction, especially if you're new to homeschooling, to kind of give you an overview of that. It does go over kind of how this book really wouldn't be useful for you if you're solely relying on an online format to teach. If you're only concerned about primarily teaching from a predefined worldview, this might not be the best book for you, though I do encourage you to read it. And you're looking for a detailed homeschooling guide with curriculum recommendations. Now this does go through recommendations through age, but it's not going to pull out specific curriculum. If you want specific curriculum resources, they do have a podcast. They mention it in here. It has changed names since then. It's called the Kitchen Table Homeschool. And unfortunately, they will be ending the podcast. I believe it stopped in February, if I read the post correctly. But I binge listened to the entire podcast. I think it's extremely helpful, especially if you're more of an academically minded homeschooler. It has a lot of relevant information, and they even go through an entire English language arts series, which is 3 episodes breaking down curriculum they have used in the past 20 years from K all the way to high school. So they really do have a lot of insightful information. So if you want more detailed stuff, I would definitely check out their podcast. But as you can see, it gives you a quick overview of how to use the book. So how to homeschool, basically, check your laws, obviously, build support network, research curriculum, test your children, get curriculum. So it gives you a quick overview here. And one of the first things you're going to do is define your educational goals. What goals do you want your child to have for their education? Again, really important. A lot of people talk about the why behind homeschooling, but you really need to figure out your educational goals as well. And this will go into different homeschooling approaches. As you can see here, Charlotte Mason, eclectic, unschooling, religious schooling. So again, these are really important information if you're new to homeschooling, to really get a broad overview of all these subjects instead of having to find them in different places. So I really like that, and it gives you this little chart here of different types of homeschooling. So chapter 3, what to teach and when. So again, it gives you this ages and stages, what to introduce when, a quick overview of it, and teaching in the core subjects. So English language arts, math, social studies, world languages, and it goes grades 4 through 8 there. You can see K through 3rd, what you should be focusing on K through 8 academics, 9 through 12. So this is a really great overview that you can reference back to. And again, this is why I plan on purchasing the book. So, if I'm looking for world languages in high school, what are some of the things I need to focus on? Goes into scheduling, different looping, so different things like basic organization of homeschooling, different ways you can do it. Next chapter is choosing quality curriculum. And I think this is really important because I've definitely seen this trend in homeschooling, at least online, where it's people, and I think it's even mentioned in this book, if not podcast, where people tend to start off more academically focused, and as they homeschool more and more, it becomes more towards unschooling. That's not to say unschooling is a negative form of homeschooling, but people seem to let the academics go the farther they go in homeschooling, and it becomes a lot more fluff instead of direct instruction, and there are some drawbacks to that. So again, one of the first things that they say is the expertise matters of the person writing the curriculum. I feel like, again, this is something I hold very dear, but when I talk about it, it's not something I see portrayed a lot on online homeschooling platforms. So YouTube, Instagram, people aren't talking about the credentials or the experience of the people behind it. It's great if a homeschool parent wants to write a curriculum and put it out there, but do they also have the expertise and experience to be putting out a curriculum out there? These matter because you are not an expert in the fields you're teaching. It's not possible to be an expert in every single field. So you really need to know you're drawing from resources that know, because there is a reason that someone has a lot of content knowledge in an area and have studied for years. That credential does matter, and where that credential comes from matters as well. So as you can see here, one of the things I absolutely loved through this entire book is you can see in the footnotes, they actually share where they got their resources from, which I won't lie, made me really excited. One of the things I absolutely hate about homeschooling curriculum is the creators never cite their sources, which that's like the basic form of writing and critical thinking that a lot of homeschool books, especially written for parents, are opinion and thoughts, and that's great, and that's a great part of homeschooling. But when you have a persuasive argument, you really need to be citing your sources in it. So I was so excited. I actually showed my husband. I'm like, oh my God, it's a homeschooling resource that actually cites its sources. So pay attention to those. You can, of course, access all those, check them out, and vet the resources for yourself. But I really appreciate that they take the time because, again, they are more academically focused to show you where they're getting the information from, because there are certain times during the book that they reference certain curriculum, and they will give you the reference to that. But this is just simple, common sense information. Expertise matter, that it's not about what it looks like, things you want to look out for. So a lot of people don't like scripted curriculum or teacher guides or teacher implementation guides, they want to do their own thing. But again, you are not an expert in this field. You don't necessarily know what you're teaching. And if you're having an off day, if you're sick, heaven forbid some type of medical crisis comes up, that scripted curriculum is going to save you. It's going to be able to let someone else take it up, or you don't have to be working at full capacity to follow a scripted curriculum. So obviously that the questions should have answers to them. Open and Go, again, is really helpful. So it gives you an idea of what to look at for curriculum and things to avoid. Again, the entertainment trap, that's what we're talking about, why people are going more into entertaining their child than necessarily educating them, that, oh, my child's not having fun, they can't learn. I have a whole video on that. I'll link up above, but that's not the point of education. You don't have to love it in order to learn. So one thing I really appreciate that they mentioned was money. A lot of homeschoolers will say money doesn't matter. You can budget, or you can homeschool in any budget. It matters. The resources you're available to you are going to be conditioned by the amount of money you can spend. There are free things like Core Knowledge, absolutely love them, but there are limited resources, and that should be acknowledged, which I really appreciated them mentioning. So Chapter 5 is all about creating and implementing a plan. So looking at content standards and objectives. And I know people are like, public school standards. No, but why is it important to have standards and check marks and benchmarks in place for your child? So they go into that. Chapter 6, obviously finding support. I think that is really important in homeschooling. It's really hard to do it all by yourself. So I really enjoyed Chapter 7 because it goes more into the science behind education and learning, which is really important. If you're going to educate, we really need to understand how a child's brain works. So it goes into working memory versus long-term memory, cognitive chunking. This is important information that you should have as an educator. And again, you don't have to agree with everything. I don't think you should ever agree with everything. You should never pick up a book and be like, oh, this is exactly me. But it does have useful information. For example, I'm not a big person that's on memorization. I've never really been that in my homeschooling. That was pretty much my entire public school education. So I've really shied away from curriculum and resources that rely on memorization because I believe more in, conceptual thinking. But really, you need both. You need content knowledge and you need the ability to critically think in order to really do a subject justice. And I think that's really important. It's really caused me to kind of think about how I approach the area of memorization in my homeschool. So again, I think you should always be reading resources that kind of force you to grow in your homeschooling or really think about different ideas. If you pick one mode of homeschooling, whatever it may be, and stick to that, I think you're really missing out on what other types of homeschooling could offer. So the authors are very classical education, that's their thing. But I will have to say, I really appreciate in the podcast that they talk about how they grapple with the classical education is very usually has religious undertones, or it's a lot of old white men literature type things, how they grapple with that, but still find academics important. Because again, I think there are many parts of classical education that I naturally adapt. Core knowledge is a big one. I believe in contextual knowledge. I believe in critical thinking. But I'm not the biggest fan of memorization and copywork and things. So you don't have to take it all, but learning about it and maybe implementing where you see it's useful in your homeschool, I think is really important. So it gives you different ideas about reading and writing. So, and then it goes into, this whole chunk here is all about specific subject areas. So this talks about composition, what you should be looking for, what you should be focusing on, vocabulary, grammar, and literature, what you should be focusing on. And I think this was really helpful because there is a ton of literature-based curriculum out there in literature studies, which again, I think are great, but you really need to look at what they're teaching. A lot of it is just fluff. You're doing 5 different activities, you're reading a book, you're trying to tie history, science, literature, everything in there. Sometimes it's too much, and honestly, it's too much for you to keep up with. I think a lot of literature-based curriculums, people burn out really quick because it requires a lot of effort on your part to bring all these different pieces together. And sometimes it's easier to just take the shorter route that, working from a textbook and bringing in some great literature suggestions, but you don't need 30 picture books to go with a unit in order for your child to understand it. I think sometimes we're overcomplicating it in that way. So I really did find that the literature section was especially helpful, especially since I enjoy literature based curriculum. Notes on math, again, conceptual versus procedural. And this is where they go into their thoughts on it. And again, I differ a little bit about this. They're big Saxon math facts and the idea of retrieval information. And I'm more of a Singapore dimensions math person, conceptual understanding, but I've come to the realization that you really do need both. You need conceptual understanding, but you need to be able to recall information as well. So social studies, choosing history spines, civics, religious literacy. Again, why it's important to have a general knowledge of what others believe, but that your education shouldn't be solely based on one perspective. Science I found really helpful because there is, one of the authors has a history and experience in the science field. So what to look for in potential issues. And for example, one of the ones they talk about is you want to teach from fact-based, and that's true. I'm a Christian, but I teach from a fact-based science point of view. That for some suggestions, it talks about here how instead of give you a scientific explanation for something, it literally just says it's because of Jesus. It doesn't give you any explanation, and that's not educating our children. I'm sorry, it's not. So notes on arts. So you can see here, this whole chunk in the middle really goes over about those specific subjects. This one about testing and why important, not just standardized testing, but having assessments within the curriculum, how that's important, that there's a way for you to gauge what they're retaining, what they're learning. I think discussion is great, and learning those things are great, but your child also needs to have working memory of those things. So having some benchmarks, because honestly, do we even know they're grasping the concept fully if they can't show us? And how do we get them to show us on paper? So some troubleshooting here when school isn't getting done. So when your child is pushing back, when something isn't working, some suggestions on here. And it's basic stuff like you're the parent, you're the teacher. You have to wear both hats on here, that, dropping things and not getting things done, that's on you. You took this role on, it's important. And then you don't have to invent the wheel with every single curriculum. It's okay to take what you got and go with it. You don't have to overdo it, which I think is so much of homeschooling right now. I really like how they talk about learning disabilities, neurodiversity, mental health. Again, they all have experience with that with their own personal children and working with other children. So this was really helpful. And how they really do give you a step-by-step on if you or someone has flagged your child as having some type of potential disability or learning challenge, how you can go about getting testing done and what the route is to do that. And they talk about this extensively in their podcast. They have an entire podcast about getting your child tested for any type of learning disability or spectrum disorders, things like that. Next one is finding you're good enough. And again, they interweave some of their personal stories throughout this, which I think is really helpful and makes it relatable. But basic information here. What helps your homeschool run smoothly? Having routine, having consistency. Like, this is not groundbreaking stuff, but it's really important basic stuff. It's not all the fluff and the pretty, but these are the things that are gonna get it done every day. You're not burning out. You have a plan, you implement that plan. The less you have to think and just be able to do is really helpful when it comes to that. Yes, you take your time vetting resources and researching everything and coming up with a plan, but then you implement the plan. Having 30 different pathways to take on a curriculum isn't necessarily going to help you. And I honestly avoid curriculums that give you like 30 options. I don't have time to look at all those options. I do appreciate that they mention housework because yes, you are still having to run a household while homeschooling. And then knowing when to quit. I really appreciate this section because it talks about when it's time to stop, whether it be mental health issues or this isn't going well for you, homeschooling isn't always the answer for you. Homeschooling is not always the answer for your child, and ultimately the best education for them is what's important, and your mental health is important as well. So it's okay, it's not a failure as a parent or homeschooler to choose a different educational option, which I think is a very important message to have. And then it goes into those homeschoolers who you met in the beginning, the different types, kind of how their journey went. And one of the things I absolutely love about it is this curricula checklist. So things you should be looking at when evaluating curriculum, because again, I don't think a lot of people even look at or have standards in mind when they're looking at curriculum and what they should be doing. So first one, author, subject, matter, experience, degrees, work experience, publications. Are they qualified to even be telling you about this subject? Has it been field tested? So not just by that person's family, but has it been tested by a wide array of students? And then it goes over different ones. So this would have been extremely helpful for me when I was starting out to have this. I kind of formulated my own checklist now, and I do have a video, I'll link up above, but a lot of this is on here. But I think it's a really good starting off point because it can get really overwhelming with all the curriculum choices out there. But really, when you have educational goals in mind and you have a checklist in mind, a lot of those are all upfront eliminated, and it makes choosing a lot easier, and it makes, looking at the pretty pictures and the fear of missing out, it's easier to deal with those things when you know you have a reason you're making the choices you're making. So again, I think this is a wonderful resource. I highly recommend you check it out, whether it be your library, whether you buy it, give it a read, and really see if it resonates with you. I found it very, especially listening to the podcast and reading this book, really reassuring, especially as an academically based homeschooler. And there's a lot of you out there. I know a lot of you have commented on my videos talking about this, how that you don't feel like you really fit into the homeschooling world because you are focused on academics, or that's something that's just important to you in your homeschooling. But this is a great resource, and definitely check out the podcast as well, that there are people that these things are a priority and why they're a priority and why they're so important. So I have this book, and then if I had to give you books suggested, the 3 main books I would suggest for homeschoolers, this would be one of them. And the other 2 I do have videos for as well. I'll link them above. The other one is Mathematical Mindsets. I'll link that one up above, my review on that. But this, again, is super important too. I think a lot of people are hesitant with math, and it scares them when teaching math and homeschooling. The third one would be Raising Critical Thinkers by Julie Bogart. I will put a picture up here because I borrowed mine from the library, but I'll link up the video of that. But these books, all 3 of those combined, would give you an awesome start, or even if you're homeschooling, broaden your homeschooling horizons. So I highly recommend any of those books. And the newest one I read, which is How to Homeschool the Kids You Have, Advice from the Kitchen Table. If you have any questions about anything I talked about, leave them in the comments below. If not, thank you for watching.